perhaps with a more nebulous sense that the fate of the world is at stake. Joining me now from Chatham House, the Independent Policy Institute, with a view on that, is Professor Yossi Mekelberg. Professor, good evening to you and welcome. Let's start with this. Presidential candidates always hype a coming election as the most important in our lifetime. Globally, this time it might be true. What's your sense?
It is true, because it's so unusual in so many instances. In a sense, this is not an election that we experience in living memory and probably in the history of the United States. It's the nature of the Trump administration and how bizarre and dangerous is the Trump administration, and all of it in the middle of a pandemic. And the combination of the two make it crucial when you have 231,000 people dead as a result of coronavirus, more than 9 million people infected with this, and more cases every day, and administration that denies how serious is the situation and actually threaten to fire their #1 expert on this. This makes it a matter of life and death.
Professor, predictably, some polls, and I stress a few, are now pointing towards the race tightening slightly. Scholars are also warning of a collapse of democracy if Donald Trump gets another term in office. Is that overstating it?
I don't think so. I think there is real danger of democracy. The way that Trump handled American democracy, which sets, at least allegedly, an example to all of us about how democracy should be run, it's probably the best example that we can have at the moment. Here is a president of the United States that casts doubts on the vote itself. He has more lawyers than campaigners to vote for him. He himself doesn't believe that he's going to win the election, so he tries to almost cancel the election. He fights with the democratic system. All the last 4 years been aberration of what we see as a proper democratic process. And if this happened in the United States, and it's also the growth of populism. It's not only the United States. We see it in Brazil. We see it in some East European countries. So there is a real fear. While we are looking, or at least in the past, we looked up to the United States to set an example. Now it's a very bad example.
Let's focus this in on your particular sphere of interest. You are an expert in global politics. 4 more Trump years, what would that mean for the Middle East? And conversely, a new administration coming in under Joe Biden, what would that signal for the region?
I think the region, let's start, for instance, with Iran. The withdrawal from the nuclear agreement, the JCPOA, was a real wrong move. It was not a perfect agreement, but at least it stopped the development of the nuclear program in Iran. Unilateral withdrawing that was harmful to the idea that there is international law and that countries abide by their agreements, let alone it almost released Iran from its commitment to this agreement instead of looking for an alternative. The Trump administration knows one trick, and which is sanctioning and aggravating relations with other countries, for instance, with China. The peace process, I think the damage goes to the peace process between the Israeli Palestinians. It was in dire straits already when Trump entered the White House. He leaves it, if he loses the election tomorrow, in a much worse situation, because he completely prejudiced every aspect of the core issues like Jerusalem, refugees, borders, natural resources, in a future agreement. Let alone the behavior towards, the conflict in Syria, not taking a proactive approach to stop the killing in Syria, the involvement of Russia. So almost now, we can also give some credit and the normalization of agreements, the peace between some of the Gulf countries and Sudan with Israel is definitely a positive move, but it also has its negative impact on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Professor, we are going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Professor Yossi Mekelberg from Chatham House, the Independent Policy Institute.